Revelation chapter 14, we hear the following. And then I looked, and behold, on Mount Zion stood the Lamb, and with him 144,000 who had his name and his Father's name written on their foreheads. And I heard a voice from heaven, like the roar of many waters, and like the sound of loud thunder. The voice I heard was like the sound of a harpist playing on their harps. And they were singing a new song before the throne, and before the four living creatures, and before the elders. No one could learn that song except the 144,000 who had been redeemed from the earth. It is these who have not defiled themselves with women, for they are virgins. It is these who follow the Lamb wherever he goes. These have been redeemed from mankind as the firstfruits for God and the Lamb, and in their mouths no lie was found, for they are blameless. Then I saw another angel flying directly overhead with an eternal gospel to proclaim to those who dwell on the earth, to every nation and tribe and language and people. And he said with a loud voice, Fear God and give him glory, because the hour of his judgment has come, and worship him who made heaven and earth, the sea, and the springs of water. Another angel, a second, followed, saying, Fallen, fallen is Babylon the great, she who made all nations drink the wine of the passion of her sexual immorality. And another angel, a third, followed them, saying with a loud voice, If anyone worships the beast and its image, and receives a mark on his forehead or on his hand, he will drink the wine of God's wrath, poured full strength into the cup of his anger. And he will be tormented with fire and sulfur in the presence of the holy angels, and in the presence of the Lamb. And the smoke of their torment goes up forever and ever, and they will have no rest, day or night, these worshippers of the beast and its image, and whoever receives the mark of its name. Here is a call for the endurance of the saints, those who keep the commandments of God and their faith in Jesus. And I heard a voice from heaven saying, Write this, Blessed are the dead who die in the Lord from now on. Blessed indeed, says the Spirit, that they may rest from their labors, for their deeds follow them. Then I looked, and behold, a white cloud, and seated on that cloud one like a son of man, with his golden crown on his head, and a sharp sickle in his hand. And another angel came out of the temple, calling with a loud voice to him who sat on the cloud, Put your sickle and reap, for the hour to reap has come, for the harvest of the earth is fully ripe. So he who sat on the cloud swung his sickle across the earth, and the earth was reaped. Then another angel came out of the temple in heaven, and he too had a sharp sickle. And another angel came out from the altar, the angel who has authority over the fire. And he called with a loud voice to the one who had the sharp sickle, Put in your sickle and gather the clusters from the vine of the earth, for its grapes are ripe. So the angel swung his sickle across the earth and gathered the grape harvest of the earth and threw it into the great winepress of the wrath of God. And the winepress was trodden outside the city, and blood flowed from that winepress as high as a horse's bridle for 1,600 stadia. Alright, so as we look at this text, right, remember we've got the 144,000 again. Remember the 144,000 are all of God's people. Some people call us the church militant, right, the church here on earth, fighting to save as many souls as possible. And what we see here is they're singing a song of victory. They're singing a song of victory with the Lamb. They're celebrating his second coming because their labor is over. Right? No longer are we carrying out Christ's mission, but instead, right, the celebration can begin. What we also see is they're learning a new song. It's the song that we're learning now. Think about it. What we say in the liturgy, right? We say, with angels and archangels and all the company of heaven, we laud and magnify your glorious name, evermore praising you and saying, right? Again, what we hear here, this new song, the song that we're learning now, is that same hymn of praise that has been broadcast, right, throughout all of Revelation, right? This Te Deum that we keep looking at over and over again. Again, the text says that the 144,000 are comprised of male virgins, and this again is another key signifier that we're talking about the church militant, right? The church that is carrying out God's orders, his instructions here on earth. The way to think about this is when you think about what an army is comprised of, especially an army in the first century, it's mostly made up of men. And what we see going on here, right, everything is pointing back to the church being holy, being pure, carrying out God's work here on earth. That's what the focus of this text is. That's what the focus of the 144,000 are, right? It's all of God's people who've carried out God's instructions, His orders here on earth from all time. Right? From there, then we shift focus a little bit, right? We have the message of the three angels. First off, we see the first angel flying overhead. He has an eternal gospel. Well, think about this again. Pretty straightforward. It's the message of Christ. But the message that is being preached here has a warning. Judgment is at hand. Right? The hour of His judgment has come. The end is here. There is no more time. Again, a second angel, right? Remember, we talked about this a little bit. Babylon being that representation of the enemies of Christ. Here it's being used in its political sense. We'll talk about this a little more later on, but just keep in mind, as we look at Babylon here, it's being a representation of the enemies of Christ. And so we see that anyone who serves the beast in thought or deed will drink from the wrath of God, tempered with no mercy. Anyone who serves the beast in thought or deed will drink from the wrath of God with no mercy. And yet, John says, for the saints who hear this call, we should be encouraged by it. Which that might seem a little bit odd, right? Those who serve the beast have to drink from the wrath of God, and yet the saints should be encouraged by it. Well, why is that? Well, we should be encouraged by it because we have this blessed rest waiting for us. This is the time, what we're seeing here is the end, when everything is coming to its completion. So that rest is coming for us. But John writes this for our benefit, that we might keep His commandments, keep His regulations, and keep the faith. So then we shift gears again, right? We're looking at the harvest of the earth now. Again, remember I told you this is a vision of the end. So now the reaping of the harvest can begin. And again, remember, we've had this image before. Christ used it regularly in His ministry. The harvest of the earth has begun. So what we see, first off, is the Son of Man. Again, this is a callback all the way from chapter 1. This is a picture of Christ. Christ sitting here ready to reap the harvest that He's been waiting so long for. Notice He sits on a white cloud, showing His purity, showing the righteousness of God. He has a crown, right? A crown of victory now, as compared to the crown of thorns that was given Him here on earth. It's an interesting switch of an image there. Right? Christ swings His sickle. He judges the earth, separating the weeds from the grain. Right? He gathers the church to Himself. Now, that's all good. This is all about us as the church. On the other hand, however, we have another angel whose task is to gather the unbelievers for God's wrath. Right? So what we see, Christ swinging His sickle, judging the earth, separating the weeds from the grain. Right? Like I said, the other angel separating the unbelievers for God's wrath. Right? They're described as being thrown into the great winepress of God. Well, the interesting thing that I find about it is John sees this winepress being trodden outside the city, and blood flows from that winepress as high as a horse's bridle for 1,600 stadia. What's interesting about that is 1,600 stadia is approximately 184 miles. Now, John's using it here to show the completeness of God's wrath and how no one can escape, but think about that image for a second. John tells us that it flows from the winepress as high as a horse's bridle. Right? The bridle is the implement that we place on horses in order to control their movement of the head. Right? So John is telling us that for 184 miles he sees blood flowing out from the winepress of God's wrath, a good 5-6 feet high. I would say that's a pretty complete picture of God's wrath. Pretty much to put it in some perspective for you, I'm up here in Sheboygan, Wisconsin. Right, we're on the south side of the city. 184 miles is approximately the distance from here to the south side of Chicago. Significant distance. Right? Blood as high as a horse's bridle that far. Something to think about.